Welcome back to artofdino.com, and I've got another Tartarian Tales number 82, and this one from Tartar City, Peking. In December 16th, 1900, the New York Tribune had an article showing unique Chinese relics, the astronomical instruments 2 centuries old, probably more. And so it had some of the amazing quadrants, astrolabes, polar axis instruments, celestial globe. And so I've been seeing, when I explored into Peking a long time ago and some other Tartarian tales, I came across this Astronomical Observatory. And so I found this article very interesting because it had a lot of information, again, from Jesuit missionaries and more compromised people. If it's in a newspaper, it's compromised, is what I'm beginning to realize. And although they like to put in opposing thoughts and different things that kind of differ from what we've been told, occasionally they'll always correct it in a later episode and keep the people in check, because that's what they are. They are means of mind control, and the people that control the printers knew that. And so take that with you as you read this stuff, because what you'll hear in this 1900s article is different than what you'll hear in older accounts, but it is, again, more information to add to the general collection of knowledge that we have of all these things. And I have a few theories of my own that I'll toss in here as well as these things come, like especially relating to the celestial globe, which I think is actually how they came up with the globe, how the frauds came up with the idea of a globe is by observing the celestial globes of ancient past, and then they decided just, let's put the map on this instead. And there you get, because there's a lot more proof of the stars looking like a dome than and being a sphere than there is of our flat land being a sphere. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well, and we'll dive into that a little bit as we go along here. But some of the Peking astronomical instruments conveyed by the Germans was also part of the topics of the article. So I'm not sure how the Germans got a hold of all of this, and after the Tartar city in Peking was seized in the late 1800s and whatnot. So there's a lot leading up to this, but either way, I'm curious about the astronomical instruments here, and I hope you are too. So here we go. Unique Chinese relics, astronomical instruments 2 centuries old, apparatus which the European invaders of Peking want to carry away. Bastards. So here we go. General Chaffee's protest against the removal of ancient astronomical instruments from Peking by the German and French military forces has drawn fresh attention to those highly interesting and unique relics of Chinese civilization. The Tribune reproduced a photograph of the Peking Observatory nearly 6 months ago. This showed a large rectangular platform of masonry on which were mounted 6 or 8 instruments, evidently in a bad state of repair and unprovided with a dome or other shelter from the weather. Through the courtesy of Professor J.K. Rees of Columbia University, it is possible to represent some of that apparatus more in detail. Professor Rees heard of this curious old institution and its equipment several years ago and took steps to secure pictures of them. These were obtained through the good offices of the American ambassador to China. Professor Rees is inclined to think that the instruments did not originate with the Chinese, Tartarians. They too strongly resemble devices which are invented by the Scandinavian astronomer Tycho Brahe. Yeah, I'm sure he was the one who invented them. Who, though he never accepted the Copernican theory of the solar system and never used a telescope, nevertheless contributed largely to the advancement of stellar science through Freemasonry. The King of Denmark gave him the little island of Hoenn in 1575, and thereon Brahe erected what was then the finest observatory in the world. He died in 1601 at Prague, more than 30 years before Galileo was compelled to recant, and 45 years prior to the famous Italian's death. They always have to bring in Galileo into all these things. I've been looking at a lot of flat Earth and different newspaper articles, and they entertain the idea a lot, but they always counter it with like the propaganda, like you're stupid if you believe that. Oh, this antiquated a thought of the flat Earth, and they constantly like the people using levels as water for proof are just ridiculous, and microbes stick to a pool cue, and that's proof that everything we see is flat, even though it's really a sphere. It's insane. I'll put another video of that later on. But just in general, the newspaper mentality is it's so propagandized and mind control oriented that it's so noticeable, and it's almost disturbing after a while, but that's what happens in America. So here we go, in the rest of the world. From Jesuit missionaries, Professor Rees suggests that the Chinese probably derived their knowledge of Brahe's inventions not from visiting Europe themselves, but through Jesuit missionaries who went to China, of course. Nearly or quite a century may have elapsed from the time of their invention before the instruments were made and used at Peking. But even this supposition leaves them over 200 years old now. One of the gifted Swedes' most useful devices was the quadrant. The essential portion of this instrument was mounted so as to move edgewise in a vertical plane, and was pivoted at the right angle formed by its two straight lines. By raising or lowering it until the uppermost of the straight edges pointed to a star, the observer could determine the altitude of that object if he consulted a scale engraved on the curved edge. I'm sure that scale was amazingly accurate too. The frame in which the quadrant was erected stood inside a horizontal circle, also carefully graduated, and could be turned from side to side. In this manner, the astronomer could ascertain the azimuth or angle between the true north and the direction in which the star happened to be at the hour of observation. Altitude and azimuth were both measured with the same instrument, but among the Peking relics were found devices of this type from which the quadrant proper is missing, no doubt as the result of accident or age. Other specimens were found in which the engraving around the horizontal circle has become obliterated, if indeed it was ever executed. The instruments have been out of service so long now that it is impossible to explain the deficiencies satisfactorily. So that's another way that they could easily just switch things by scratching off. What if the Chinese had very much less numbers and altitudes in theirs, instead of millions and 93 million miles away and stuff like that for the sun? What if they had totally different numbers that someone just happened to scratch out by accident before publishing? Another antiquated piece of astronomical apparatus was the Astrolabe. Of course it's antiquated. It was only used for centuries and thousands of years before, but these guys had nothing. It's so funny, the propaganda. This was made in various forms, some simple and some complex. They consisted essentially of one or more graduated circles, and their chief function was to measure the altitude of celestial objects. A small portable astrolabe was carried by navigators in the 16th century. Sir Francis Drake was provided with one on his voyages of exploration. Others were designed to remain in one place and position permanently, and might then be made on a much larger scale. Several of the Peking instruments are evidently of this description, although they are not all alike. It is possible to recognize in one of the dismounted relics at Peking the use of a polar axis. This is the mechanism by means of which telescopes are today enabled to follow a star in spite of the apparent rotation of the heavens about the pole. But if this feature of the Chinese instrument should excite a momentary suspicion as to its antiquity, all doubt would be set at rest by an examination of the primitive appliance for ascertaining the declination of a star, which constitutes another part of the same device. So there's always them questioning. And again, who's to tell what was removed before these pictures were seen, before anything would happen? Like this after Peking started to get attacked, I'm sure the observatory was one of the first places that people went to, and so there's no telling what type of vandalism it suffered from. Other instruments, the Chinese also had a celestial globe, a huge bronze sphere on whose surface the stars were represented by brass-headed nails. See, to me, that makes a lot of sense. Representing the stars on a globe makes tremendous amount of sense. Because of the way they move, everything would work perfectly. But the Earth doesn't make sense. It doesn't line up with the way people see it from planes and from above. It totally is a different thing. When you put the map on a flat plane and on a globe, it creates something entirely different. It's flat. The globe could hardly have been less than 6 feet in diameter. It's still pretty big. The photograph of this object and some of the other apparatus shows them elsewhere than on the platform of the observatory. They are temporarily placed near trees and beside small pavilions. By what hands and for what purpose the removal took place, it is impossible to say. Perhaps they were taken down by the Chinese themselves for repairs. However this may be, the partly dismantled condition of the observatory hardly justifies the proposed vandalism of the invading military forces. Yeah. An important difference between the Peking instruments and those of Brahe and his European disciples is their ornamentation. The founder of the Hoenn Observatory Brahe exhibited the utmost simplicity in his designs and avoided all detail that had no practical use. But the Mongolians did not slavishly imitate. They wedded science to art. They covered their quadrants, astrolabes, globes, and other devices with a wealth of decoration. This being distinctly Chinese, too, renders the equipment of the Beijing Observatory doubly interesting. And boy, would I like to get my hands on that art, because I guarantee there's meaning in it. And that's why they don't talk about it here. All these newspapers, all these things are always just selective. They're so selective. I'm sure their editor was like, nah, we're not going to touch on that. You're going to leave that part out. Let's not show that picture, etc. And then when you do that, you get millions of people around the world reading an article just like this, but none of them are getting the important things. They're only getting a dumbed down view of what really happened. Like, look at that celestial globe and all the notches on it, all the different measurements. Just because the Europeans and stuff can't understand it doesn't mean that it doesn't make any sense, or that it's representing something false or antiquated. All of these things, the quadrant that they show is unbelievable. These things are big, these things are massive, these things definitely were used properly by these people at one point in its prime. Again, in this Beijing Observatory's prime, when it was Tartar City, there's no telling what they saw, what they did, what they measured, what they found, everything like that. And they may not have had telescopes per se that we've quote unquote found, but then again, who's to say that they didn't? What if they did have telescopes, but people were like, oh, this telescope was real? The people in charge were like, oh, this telescope's really old and it's better than ours, and it's basically completely throws into the trash everything we've been teaching everybody. Then they would just get rid of it and continue their own history. And oh, these guys never even had a telescope. Meanwhile, there's telescopes hidden from these people. And I don't know the truth. I don't claim to, but I suspect a lot of different things, and I know how easy it is to pull the wool over a lot of people's eyes with writing during the old times. So you got to take everything with a grain of salt. Hope you enjoyed the art that I've shown here, some AI art, some old pictures, all kinds of different things, and I hope it adds to the story. There's always a tiny little hidden gems in each one of these Tartarian tales and each one of these articles that I find, and when piecing it together, they make a giant, beautiful whole. But there's still a lot of other holes, H-O-L-Es, missing from it all. And we've got to keep finding, because somewhere the answers lie, and they've been hidden for us deliberately for so long, so you know they're stored somewhere deliberately and protected. And we got to get to them, and we will someday. Bless you all. Keep digging.